A very good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today at this student panel discussion on bridging the digital divide in smart cities, a path to inclusive urbanization. This session is organized by the Tech Urban Student Group, a student group based here at Kuan School of Public Policy that brings together students who are passionate about tech and urban issues. I also understand that this is the only session for and by students at the Festival of Ideas, and we thank the school and Claudia for it. Many cities in the region, Southeast Asia, South Asia, are rapidly urbanizing, with megacities growing significantly in the recent years. As technologies advance, smart cities have emerged, and we're all aware of this term, of course. But using digital technologies to improve efficiency, sustainability, and citizen well-being is one of their key motives. However, urban challenges like housing shortages, job scarcity, and aging infrastructure persist. Alongside this, the digital divide or unequal access to the digital technology has emerged, with gaps in ICT infrastructure, digital literacy, and language marginalizing certain populations. This digital divide limits the full potential of the smart cities, their residents, and ultimately the progress of our economies and countries. With this, I'm excited to welcome you all to our student panel discussion. We are joined by passionate students who are excited to share with you their insights on the topic, and we look forward to all of you participating in the Q&A in the end as well. Let me introduce myself. I'm Gaurav Thapak, the moderator for this session. I'm a second-year student of public policy here at LKY School of Public Policy. I have experience working with the governments in India on sustainable development, urbanization, and also their flagship program of smart city missions, which is by the Government of India. Moving on to the panelists, first up we have on my left, Willow Wong. Willow is a second-year Master in Public Policy student who's also my classmate. Willow has conducted research into the ethics and governance of artificial intelligence. Prior to joining LKYSPP, Willow served as the principal investigator for a one-year research project on auditing AI technologies and building trust in Singapore. Her research interests range across disciplines such as normative foundations of good governance, ethics, regulation, the policies of technology, and the geopolitical dynamics of emerging technologies. Welcome, Willow. Next to Willow is Aditya. Aditya Dharmawan is a first-year student of public policy at LKYSPP. With a decade of experience at the Indonesian Ministry of Finance, he currently serves as the State Asset Manager in the Directorate General of State Assets. Aditya holds degrees in accounting and management and earned public-private partnership professional certification in 2018. He has supported PPP development projects, including a hospital, tourism market, and water supply systems, and led innovative financing initiatives for the state-owned enterprises. Welcome, Aditya. Next to Aditya, we have Liana. Liana is a second-year Master of Public Policy student at LKYSPP. She has professional experience as the Senior Economic Development Specialist at National Economic and Development Authority, NEDA, in the Philippines, where she focused on public investment and infrastructure development. Liana recently interned at the Asian Development Bank, where she contributed to the Make Manila More Maganda project, which focused on human-centric design approaches in urban development within Metro Manila. Lastly, on the extreme left, we have Kritika. Kritika is a PhD candidate at LKYSPP. Her current research focuses on policy design and governance of smart cities, specifically investigating the challenges of governing inclusive smart cities and exploring the role of government and technology companies in adopting advanced technologies and their implication to policy design. She's trained as an architect in India and holds a Master in Urbanism from the Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. I gratefully welcome you all panelists to this panel, and we begin with the first round of discussions. So for our participants and attendees, I would like to note that this session does not have any presentations. It's more of a free-flowing discussion based on the work and the rich experience our panelists come from. We have 3 rounds of discussion and followed by an open house for our audience to ask questions and raise notes, concerns, etc. And let's get into the discussion rounds. So the first question I have is for Kritika. You have a depth of experience working on the governance and regulation of smart cities with a focus on Smart Nation initiative of Singapore. And you have experience working in developing and the developed countries. I would like to understand from you what are the motivations and the drivers for smart cities that you've come across in your work, experience, research. In addition, what do you think are differences in approaches in smart cities of developed and developing countries?
Hi, everybody. Am I audible, hopefully, at the end? Am I audible now? Microphone? Yep. So first of all, thank you for the Tech Urban student group for forming this panel. I'm looking forward for a very good discussion today. I'm hoping to learn a little bit more on this topic. So as introduced very kindly by Gaurav, I have worked as an urban planner and architect previously, and for the last 5 years, I have been researching governance of smart cities. So okay. So is this better now? I think so, yeah. Thanks, Paul. Yeah. So I'll just repeat for the online audience. As introduced very kindly by Gaurav, I have worked as an architect and urban planner before in India and briefly in Europe as well. And for the last 5 years, I've been here at LKY-SPP researching on the governance of smart cities. So this is the background I'm trying to come from. And within that, I'm trying to highlight. So there are a few points I want to highlight on this question. So first of all, cities pursue smart city projects. Governments pursue smart city projects for a variety of reasons. So we must acknowledge that there are several institutional, cultural, contextual variations in smart cities. And therefore, every city will interpret smartness in a different way. So if Singapore is seeking complete digital transformation across several sectors, let's say Amsterdam Smart City Program is looking for strategic urban projects and collaboration with the private industry. India, I'm sure Gaurav would also highlight the same, is mainly seeking urban renewal and retrofitting through technology in this case. Now, keeping this variation and richness in mind, there are actually several drivers that push for the adoption of smart city projects. Some of these are quite universal across developing as well as developed states. These include increasing investment and increasing investment avenues and furthering infrastructure development, trying to attract a population that is rich in human and social capital, improving broad efficiency and resource utilization of its urban services, and increasing participation of its residents in the governance system through digital technologies. Now, as I said, several of these drivers hold true across contexts, but I think there are certain characteristics of developing countries in particular which we must pay attention to. If we look at the literature on developing countries, elements such as income inequality, productivity, poverty, innovation, whether there is political freedom or the level of overall governance, these are certain factors which actually take up a bit of attention. And these need to be accounted for if we want to discuss what drives smart city development. So I would say, based on my experience and research, a lot of the smart city development in developing countries are another form of urban redevelopment projects. So people are looking to actually improve on their infrastructure, physical mostly, and as well as digital infrastructure to further its urban efficiency in this. So additionally, developing countries are also seeking some form of economic stability. So smart city projects actually offer a way to facilitate additional flow of capital. And it becomes very important in certain cases that a city remains, the economic situation of a city remains constant enough to actually attract certain financial resources. So developing countries, when we talk about financial resources, developing countries also have several constraints in this direction. So India, for example, given financial resource constraints, they actually had a competition for smart city projects. So we are allocating our limited funds, but we'll allocate it very to strategic cities which show promise through their proposals. Another driver which sort of features more here is trying to attract knowledge transfer and participation from the private sector. So if the developing country is lacking in capacity to further its smart city ambitions, partnering with, I would say, private technology companies becomes a very crucial driver in this case for several cities in Southeast Asia in particular. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Kritika. And just to add to that point of competition, it's called competitive federalism in the Indian system now. Thank you so much. Aditya, everyone here right now would agree that infrastructure becomes an important component in smart cities and physical infrastructure more so. There's an added component of digital infrastructure, which often people would miss out, which is key to making cities smarter. And at the same time, digital divide that we observe in cities can be attributed to the divide in infrastructure as well, access, affordability, and so on. You've dealt with infrastructure financing in Indonesia and as a state asset manager. And in your experience, how important do you consider the role of government in building or facilitating the construction of digital infrastructure is? Do you think governments in developing countries, particularly the local governments, you have had experience there, have enough resources at their disposal, both financial and technical, to bridge this digital divide in terms of digital or smart infrastructure?
Okay, am I audible? Good. Thank you so much for the opportunity sitting here and sharing my experience in here. And thank you so much for joining us in this discussion. Actually, as Kritika has said, in building smart cities, there are drivers that are needed to make it happen. So in principle, the task of the government is to ensure that all these drivers are available. Therefore, the role of government is very important in building or facilitating the development of digital infrastructure, especially in developing countries. I want to highlight several key underlying these reasons. The first one is actually Kritika already said about the basic infrastructure. We need to provide some basic infrastructure like digital infrastructure, such as internet networks, data centers, and telecommunication. All this infrastructure require large initial investments. Government have a role to play in providing or facilitating the development of this basic infrastructure, especially in areas that are less attractive to private investment due to the low potential returns or high risk. And the second reason is creating policies and regulations. Government are responsible for setting policies, regulation, and standards that ensure that digital infrastructure is built in fair, safe, and inclusive manner. This policy includes ensuring network neutrality, protecting data privacy, and facilitating fair competition among service providers. And the next one is facilitate a universal access. One of the major challenges in digital infrastructure development is ensuring equitable access to the entire population, including in remote or rural areas. Without government intervention, many areas may not be served by the private sector due to low profitability, and the government can provide subsidies, incentives, or directly build infrastructure in these areas. And the next one is reducing the digital divide. Government play an important role in bridging the digital divide between urban and rural areas. This gap is often created by the inability of certain communities to access or utilize digital technologies. So through digital literacy programs, subsidies, or public access services, government can help reduce this gap. And the next one, we talk about encouraging investment. The government can create a conducive climate for private investment in digital infrastructure development. This can be done through the fiscal incentive, blended finance, or PPP, public-private partnership that enable collaboration between the public and private sectors in building the necessary infrastructure. And the last one, innovation and digital transformation. The government also plays a role in encouraging innovation and the use of digital technology. to improve public sector efficiency, such as a government services, digitalization of health services, education, or transportation. This not only accelerate digital transformation in the public sectors, but also creates an ecosystem that supports the growth of the digital economy as a whole. So based on my experience, government in developing countries, especially local government, generally face limitation in terms of financial and technical resources to bridge the digital divide, including the development of digital infrastructure and smart infrastructure. Here's some that I can to explain about the reasons. The first one that I will talk about this is financial limitations. Local governments often have a limited budget, which are prioritized to basic infrastructures such as health, education, transportation, or other public services. So investing in digital and smart infrastructures requires substantial funds, from building telecommunication networks or something kind of that. And some of the factors that aggravate the financial problems are dependence of the central funds and limited access to alternative source of financings. And the second one that become the challenges is a limited technical capacity. So some local government often lack of expert and human resources with the necessary technical expertise to design, to implement or manage digital infrastructure projects. Some of the technical challenges includes lack of technical knowledge and skills, lack of strategic plans, and cybersecurity risks. So many local government do not have staff or who understand about digital technology, don't understand about big data management. So without a proper planning and a clear roadmap, local governments will struggle to design and let alone establish partnership with the private sector. And digital infrastructure is highly vulnerable to cyber threats, and local government often lack the capacity to protect public network and data from these threats. Okay.
Thanks, Aditya. Lana, you come from a similar professional background as Aditya, working in the Economic Development Department of Philippines, especially on infrastructure financing.
Yeah.
And recently you worked with the ADB on people-centric design in cities.
Yeah.
Having been on both sides, how important do you think inclusion and people-centric design are in infrastructure development and city planning? And more importantly, in smart cities, when there's a whole new component that is attached to the more traditional knowledge and practices that we've been dealing with. Do you think social inclusion and public participation and collaboration, which Aditya just pointed out, are necessities in smart cities, or are they just nice to haves?
Okay, so thank you for having me here. And yeah, so building on Kritika's point on having drivers and Aditya's elaboration on the role of government, at the end of the day, who are the users of smart cities? It's us, right? It's all of us. So I think the center or the heart of every smart city initiatives, project, program, or activity should be us, the people who will actually use these smart city initiatives. So for me, it's non-negotiable. It should be a part of every development planning, smart city initiatives. So I would just like to highlight why we need to consider social inclusion and the needs of the people in every smart city initiatives, and why it's a must-have, not just a nice-to-have. So first is, we all know that every bedrock, every goal of smart city initiative is to improve people's lives, right? So if we don't consider the study, or we don't consider the needs of the people, then we don't fulfill that purpose of improving the lives of the people. Like, we might build this like fancy technological smart equipments, smart tools, smart city initiatives, but if doesn't consider the people's needs, then there's really no point of investing or building this smart city initiatives. Second is, for me, is like my source of frustration when I was working in the government and in ADB, like public consultation, public needs assessments is just mostly an afterthought. So like we have this project proposals, we just focus on financial investments, economic viability. But most often, we often overlook the needs of the people, or usually it's just for compliance reports only. So I've come to the conclusion, I realized that I think it's high time that we should do mandatory public consultation so that planners, smart city designers could engage with the communities, talk with them on the ground, and understand their actual needs and concerns. Therefore, we will have smart city initiatives that are relevant, accessible, as pointed by Aditya, and technology inclusive project results. And in terms of marginalization, or in terms of social inclusion, like having an assessment, a thorough assessment of the people's needs can result to actually can result to the inclusion of marginalized groups. So we know that we're gonna discuss further in the discussion here that smart cities they result to digital divide. So with social inclusion, with actually having in mind the people, then we could avoid perpetuating the existing inequalities, digital divide perpetuated by smart cities. And just 4 points of the benefits of people-centric design on making the people at the center of smart cities. First, relevance. So when, the problem with smart cities or any other infrastructure problem, we dive deep first in the problems. So we dive deep into the solutions first, right? It's a problem in the government. Yeah. We first think of solutions rather than discussing, studying the problem. So if we study further the problem and actually see if solutions are actually catered to the needs of the people, then we could have relevant smart city initiatives. Third would be engagement. We all know that people, the public, are sometimes wary of smart city initiatives, like privacy concerns. So if we could engage them thoroughly in the onset of designing cities, so we could have them feel the ownership. Like we could make smart city initiatives ownership of the people. Yeah. And lastly is the benefits of people-centric design is improving quality of life. Just to reiterate that the goal of smart cities is should not be actually bring in substantial financial investment or technology, but it should actually be towards to improving basic services, like in terms of safety, transportation, and resources. Yeah, so I think that's it for me now. Thank you.
Thanks, Liana. You raised an important point of safety, and that relates to my question for Willow. Your interest and research revolve around the role of good governance, ethics, and regulations for AI, and how the myths and the hype of AI can be contained to deliver public benefits. And as I come full circle with the panel, starting from the high-level discussions of the adoption of technologies and development of smart cities, do you think cities, both in developed and developing nations, are ready to utilize these novel technologies? What is the role of AI and data in smart cities?
Thanks, Gaurav, and thank you to TUSG for organizing this. Thank you to the audience who decided to spend your afternoon with us. The topic of smart city is very close to my heart, not least because Singapore is a little red dot, so our smart city is actually our smart nation. I delved into this topic, I think, when COVID first started, and of course, a lot happened between 2020 and 2024. One of the remarkable changes is the popularity and the mainstreaming of AI models. People are using AI not just in public sector, but also in government, but also in everyday life. And because of that, it's so important to, in a way, pierce through the noise and the hype that Gaurav, you mentioned, and really focus on what are the innovative solutions that actually work that are, like Liana said, people-centric, that are environmentally sustainable. And I will say my initial instinct is that not every part of city governance need to be channeled through ChatGPT. That's just the instinct of mine. But also, it's not just technology for technology's sake. We need to ask ourselves very basic questions like, what is the purpose of smart city? And that goes back to Kritika's important point that there are certain assumptions we take with us when we think of smart city. And in Singapore's case, I would categorize the purpose in two ways. It would be, first of all, to improve the efficiency of public services. So it could be that in digitizing certain services, you can monitor in real time how things are being carried out in terms of energy consumption, climate control, etc. And in doing so with data analytics, you can automate certain processes that make public service run more efficiently. That's the internal lens. For the external lens, it could be that smart city helped to minimize the distance between government and people. And in a very everyday sense, we could see that by apps that the Singapore government has developed so that we can access our health data through mobile apps like Health Buddy and Sing Health. But also we can make appointments with relevant government ministries through online portals as well as mobile apps. Or what's become really popular lately is the disbursement of government payouts like the CDC vouchers that are very popular. These digital infrastructures have minimized the distance between government policies and people receiving the benefits and impacts of those policies. And as I found out recently, you can also apply for marriages online here in Singapore. So in a sense, cities in developing but also developed nations can benefit from the opportunities that are provided by new technologies. But going back to Gaurav's question, when we think about readiness, how do we deal with, for example, the need for not only technology expertise, but also policies that underpin those using of technology? So I was in an afternoon panel yesterday on AI and cyberspace. A colleague of mine was a speaker, Manoj, and he made a really good point to say, first of all, you need money to buy these technologies and services, but buying doesn't equate to the ability to use it. You need civil servants who have the technological know-how to use it, but also to kind of safeguard these digital infrastructure from cybersecurity vulnerabilities, but as well to know what are the upsides and downsides of technologies when it comes to citizen using smart cities. And we can think of these risks in terms of social and digital divide, but also environmental footprints, etc. So maybe we'll delve into this in more detail, but it's very important to recognize that smart cities and technologies exist in a space and it's used by actual people. So we have to be careful that technology doesn't drive a wedge between government and people, but also between people and people. And I hope that the point of harnessing the power of digital information, digital identity, and digital transaction within a city is something that we can delve into more this afternoon.
Thanks, Willow. You raised an important point of how smart cities and data cannot be used for driving a wedge between people and people, and that we see that happening every day in our lives, in our countries and cities. I am going to go back to Aditya for my next round, and you already raised some of these issues that I'm going to ask about. But what are some challenges that you've noticed or faced from the government side, both at the local and the national level, in the financing and implementation of ICT infrastructure projects and services? Perhaps you could cite some examples from Indonesia and relate to some local government's efforts to be smart in Indonesia.
Okay, thank you, Gaurav. Yes, like I already stated earlier that the challenges faced by governments are mainly related to the limited budget and resources, right? I want to try add some other challenges that we face. The first is the regulatory and policy barriers. where there are lack of consistent policies and complicated licensings. The absence of well-coordinated policies between central and local government often causes ICT projects to be stalled at the local level. And then licensing process for ICT projects, such as the installation of telecommunication towers or internet networks in some areas, are often convoluted and slow down project execution. And the second one that we face as the challenges is project maintenance and sustainability, that already mentioned by Willow, that there is a lack of ability to use the technology. So after ICT infrastructure project are completed, there is a long-term maintenance is often underfunded, and that's the support that support your opinion, and leading to a decline in service quality. In addition, limited budget and long-term plans cause many ICT infrastructure to become obsolete quickly, while technology upgrades require additional costs that are not always available. And the third one is access to supporting infrastructure. So basically, some areas in Indonesia still lack basic infrastructure such as a stable electricity, which is critical to supporting ICT infrastructure. Then in remote areas, internet access and telecommunication networks still limited, making it difficult to build reliable ICT infrastructure. And lastly, I want to say about data security and privacy. So many local government lack adequate cybersecurity infrastructure, making them vulnerable to attacks. In addition, there is an unclear data privacy policy, where the lack of clear guidelines regarding data privacy leads to risk in the management of public data. Maybe some of us know about the case in Indonesia, about the Bjorka case. Yes, the Bjorka case. This is the case that happened in Indonesia in 2022. Basically, Bjorka is the pseudonym of the hacker who claims to have successfully hacked and sold personal data belonging to the millions of Indonesian, from like data about the politician, data about the number of citizen, something kind of like that. And so basically, Bjorka create a sensation by leaking the personal data of a number of officials and publishing it on the online forums. So it raising concerns about Indonesia weak cybersecurity. The case highlighting a weaknesses in the data protection and accelerated the debate of the importance of passing of the law to personal data protection. So actually, this case can so the law which was finally passed in 2022. So related to the question from the Gaurav, I will talk about how the Indonesia government is trying to realize the smart cities in various parts in Indonesia. So I want to elaborate about the project that called Palaparing project, which is this project use a blended finance scheme, including PPP. So the Palaparing project is one of the largest telecommunication infrastructure project in Indonesia, which aims to build a national fiber optic network backbone. This project is effort to provide fast and equitable internet access throughout Indonesia, because Indonesia is very large. The total length of the fiber optic cables built is in this project reach more than 36,000 kilometers. So it's covering the land and the subsea networks. So basically, the background for this project is because there was a significant digital divide between urban and remote areas in Indonesia, and the objection is to fulfill Indonesian government vision to build Indonesia as a digitally connected country and support the acceleration of digital transformation in various sectors, such as education, health, and economy. So this project utilizes a PPP scheme where the government works with the private sector to finance, build, operate, and build some telecommunication infrastructure. So we use blended finance because the Palaparing project is financed by a private consortium, which will then receive revenue from leasing the use of this infrastructure network by internet service providers, and the government provides support in the form of VGF, Viability Gap Fund, to bridge the financial gap, especially for segments that are less commercially attractive. So Palaparing has successfully expanded internet connectivity across the Indonesia, enabling faster and more equitable access to information and communication, and better connectivity in remote areas. But there is some challenges that faced by local government that affected by this Palaparing project. The first one, like already said before, lack of supporting infrastructure, such as like an electricity, unstable electricity that have difficulty taking full advantage. And then lack of digital literacy, like already Willow mentioned. So there is a low level in digital literacy. And lastly, lack of technical capacity. The lack of technical capacity and supporting infrastructure in some regions can make the implementation of e-government services hamper or can be ineffective. Okay, that's it.
Thanks, Aditya. You raised an important point of data security, and I'd like Willow's thoughts on those. So smart city initiatives have been around for a while now, and about 2 decades. And these initiatives generally take a long time to develop, given the time it generally takes for an idea to conceptualize, develop knowledge and systems for it, and have them fully functional. The pandemic, however, hastened the approach of developing these technologies and in different cities, leading to some cities becoming more smarter than the others. And it came with its own problems. The case of Trace Together, which is, I think, contrasting to what Aditya just mentioned, here in Singapore showed that Singapore's relatively well-oiled digital infrastructure, not everything is about physical aspect of the infrastructure. There were finer details which were omitted, which the government had to add, which were earlier omitted or were an oversight. Perhaps the audience would appreciate your brief explanation of Trace Together. And I'd like your thoughts on day-to-day challenges of people using technology in everyday city life of Singapore.
Sure. Yeah, so I guess I will be mainly speaking about the Singaporean context. That's what I'm most familiar with. But I'd really just like to emphasize again what Garth's point that when we think about technology, it's not just the hardware or software, and in that domain, of course, cybersecurity is a very serious concern, but there's also genuine policy considerations that should underpin how technology are used within smart cities. And jumping to the case of Trace Together, given that we have diversity in the room, I'll just kind of summarize the case and use that to talk about the importance of having good policies in place. So the case of Trace Together was a wake-up call in a way for many Singaporeans, in that in March 2020, we were in the beginning, the burst of COVID-19 pandemic cases. And so the government agency GovTech created a Trace Together mobile app that facilitated a safe entry system where people will use the mobile app, or if they don't have a smartphone, they'll use a physical token to register their details when they enter buildings or hospitals or even hawker centers. And this identity, this token or app is tagged to your national identity, your passport numbers. And it went into contact tracing efforts to curb the spread of COVID-19. And the way it worked was through a Bluetooth signal that measured your proximity to other users around you. And by the way, at this point, a year into the launch of contact tracing Trace Together app, about 80% of Singaporean residents were enrolled, because otherwise it's very difficult to live your day-to-day city life without signing up to this technology. It was in a way a top-down, rolled out procedure. And so in January 2021, when it was revealed in Parliament that contact tracing data that was collected for through the Trace Together app and token, when it's actually used for criminal investigation, this was highly controversial because it was not fulfilling the primary purpose of when the data was collected. And as a result, an emergency bill was passed to say, okay, we will use these data, but only for very serious criminal offenses. But by then, in a way, the damage, or rather the trust that was eroded had already occurred, not just because I think Singaporeans are relatively tolerant of privacy intrusions compared to Europeans or Americans, but it's the fact that, first of all, it's a government-driven initiative, but also the messaging when it comes to communicating that policy was not consistent and was lacking transparency and honesty. And so when it comes to public trust, it's in the eyes of the citizen, back to Liana's passion, is how do I know as an everyday citizen that you, in the power of authority, will keep your words? And usually Singapore fares really well, but I would say in this scenario, it was in a way a wake-up call for citizens to really consider, what does my data mean to me and to other people who can gain access to that? So now, post-COVID, our concern is less about contact tracing, but about the rise of online scams that affect not just the elderly, as we might assume is the case, but the majority of cases of scams actually involves people that are our age, between 20 to 50 or 60. And so the concern really is, for example, when you receive phone calls of someone anonymous claiming to be ICA officers or Ministry of Health officers, in this very uncertain and complex digital environment, are there ways for governments to provide assurance and confidence of digital identity, of the safety of your digital transactions? And so apps like Scam Shield is incredibly useful in instilling confidence, but it's also about the softer awareness-raising campaigns and educational opportunities to raise digital literacy skills for people to identify when they might be falling prey. And maybe I'll just touch on something really quick before passing on the mic, is the issue of digital divide in everyday life here in Singapore. One thing that hasn't changed since COVID is the prevalence of QR codes everywhere you go. Where you go into a restaurant, no longer are you speaking to a waitress to place your order. And that might just be a small inconvenience for many of us, but I would imagine for people who maybe their first language is Malay or is Teochew, when they look at the app, if there are no photos, it is a form of exclusion. And sure, you might say dining is less important. Maybe it's just you can always seek help for someone, but the threat becomes a lot clearer when the mode of engaging key government services through apps and through web portals are also through English, and it requires people to be able to read and understand. Now, the fortunate thing is many government websites now have the options to change the language to Malay or Chinese or India to Tamil. And there are also choices to adjust the font sizes. So little design choices like this actually means a lot to the end users of Smart City.
I'm going to zoom out from the daily life and bring in Kritika and her experience to connect the dots between the lower order day-to-day challenges that Willow just mentioned, that people face in cities, to the higher order challenges that the governments might face in building up, supporting and sustaining smart city, while ensuring that everyone who it intends to serve is served in the city with diverse needs and the desires. So based on your research or your experience, what are the recurring issues that you have seen in governance of smart cities? What challenges beside institutions, specifically local governments, that hinder cities from becoming smart cities in the world?
that is a big question. So first of all, smart cities are like most urban policies in my head. So there are certain constraints and barriers which are universal across other policy issues. So budgetary. Oh, can I have the other mic? Okay. So what I mean is that, yes, there are certain constraints which are shared across several policy sectors. So budgetary and financial constraints are not something which are exclusive to smart city development. Lack in infrastructure or furthering of tech-driven infrastructure readiness, a fragmented authority system. So even in a local government, you may not have a very coherent institutional structure, and the lack of, let's say, governance or regulatory standards for technology. So this is something which I think extends beyond smart cities. But I would like to highlight through my research what I found was particularly for inclusive development in smart cities, since Gaurav mentions that we are trying to include everybody, having an equitable access to urban services, etc. So what are some of the barriers which are very particular to this context? So one of them arises is the involvement of technology companies or big tech companies in this regard. We haven't really spoken on this. Perhaps this is not the right panel to delve in detail for this. But are we sure that the motivations of big tech companies align with the motivations of the public or the government in charge? And does the government have enough, I would say, structural power to be able to regulate the big tech companies as and how when needed? Perhaps not. We do need the technological companies, and the challenge is to figure out how we align our interests and best serve the needs of the public, because that's what governments are there for. Another issue I think we have discussed, Willow has briefly discussed, are ethical challenges. So many smart technologies are in play, but do we really know how the algorithm has been designed? Are there biases present in it? I'm sure they are, but are the designers aware of it? At the same time, are the designers aware of their own inherent biases? So technology doesn't appear out of thin air. One of us is, or several of us are designing it, and we inherently have biases in the design, in the data collection processes. So these are some of the challenges which I feel are very particular for inclusive development in smart cities. The other very key point, which is the theme for this, is digital divide and rising social polarization. When we don't implement smart technologies equitably, and not just implement, but ensure it's accessible by the wider population, what can happen is we have a certain section of the population benefiting very greatly from these technologies, improving quite rapidly in their use of government services, their access to government services. But a certain section of the population, as Willow points out, it might be the elderly, it might be people who may not be familiar with certain languages, certain contexts, and these people might be just left out. And this is not just a day-to-day problem, but it is also a problem which needs to be handled at the governance level. And lastly, which I want to touch upon, is the lack of regulatory and policy capacity. I think being in a public policy school, if there are students here, they would have heard this term day in and day out of what is policy capacity, how can we address policy capacity. And that becomes very important to having sufficient analytical capacity, operational capacity in smart cities is very important for the government, so that they can actually manage and sustain the smart city development in the direction they want to. I would like to maybe sort of raise a few examples to sort of illustrate how this is happening. So in Dubai, we have the smart city, yes, the aims and the objectives of smart city development there is very different from here in Singapore, but they have, much like Singapore, a very robust training program there. So they're including smart tech training for using technologies in their education systems, right, from school to university, but they're also training their public servants to be capable. Singapore, I think, has taken that a step beyond, because there are training services, and I'm sure Willow can account for that, is that there are training programs and facilities available in the community level. So seniors are being encouraged to come in, develop their skills, improve access through that measure. So yes, to summarize, yes, there are challenges in implementing smart city solutions for especially which are inclusive in nature. But I do see a lot of promise in several projects which show that how these challenges can be bridged further.
Thanks, Kritika. Liana, we've heard different issues from the dimensions of physical infrastructure and governance, and Will has managed to touch some points on user experience and smart city technologies. In many cities, it would seem, however, that digitalization comes with exclusion. Do you believe this is the case? And can you share some critiques of smart cities from the lens of social inclusion and people-centric design?
I think it was thoroughly discussed with my fellow panelists here with the tracing app. Like, people can't use it because they don't understand the language. So I'll share a little bit about, criticism from the macro perspective. So commonly, the design of smart cities is usually they do a top-down approach, like the government, the agency assigned in planning smart cities usually design the smart cities without actually doing public consultation. So in the Philippines, and I believe in many other developing countries, we still do the smart city 1.0 approach. So this is a very top-down approach, like the planners think about smart city initiatives, they design, seek funding. Yeah. So another point that I found it like the most interesting was actually smart cities also causes like environmental stress, because often smart cities, uh, because they have because mostly they are more economically advanced than other cities. So people from the rural areas or the less economically developed ones move to this wealthier smart cities. So it actually perpetuates the urban-rural divide. Another point is we've mentioned a couple of times is digital divide. So we know that having smart cities, we have to rely more on digital infrastructure, as Aditya mentioned, or digital equipment. So it actually exacerbates more on the social inequality issue, because now you have to buy phones, laptops, computer to keep up with the smart city requirements. Another interesting is actually smart cities can result to gentrification, because as a cost of living in a smart city increases, the smart city becomes more economically advanced. So people who are lower income from these smart cities, they move out or migrate to the peripheries of smart cities. So it not only causes digital divide, but also physical divide. Yeah. Lastly is since we're still mostly are doing the top-down approach, is there's limited public participation. So as I've mentioned before, there's no really a thorough or robust input from the communities on what their actually needs. Yeah, and as also pointed out by Willow and Kritika, accessibility issues. So it's a common issues found in all smart city initiatives, both in developed and developing country. Yeah. Hope I answered the question.
Thank you. Willow, the question for you is that the world of data governance and AI is fairly nascent. However, the use of AI and big data for decision making in governments is catching up very soon, and everyone, especially cities, want to join this bandwagon. To avoid major pitfalls, what are some factors that you consider the local or the city governments in developing countries should be mindful of as they climb up the ladder of becoming smart cities? And I understand Singapore has been instrumental in that direction as well. So what are some suggestions for the developing countries?
Sure. I'm always a little wary that Singapore can issue lessons to our neighbors, because Singapore has its own unique context, and our neighbors' geographies and people and history is so different. I'll just say kind of my own takeaways, maybe of when we think about data governance and AI. Again, going back to the point I mentioned earlier, is when we're thinking about using technology, it's also about governing technology. How can we maximize the benefits of innovative solutions, but also minimize harms? And if I can sort of tap on something I learned from Kritika, is there are issues that you can address at a governance high level policy level, but there are also interventions that should absolutely go towards the ground level where people are interacting with the smart city, with technologies within smart city. And so maybe just on the point of AI, form the point of policymakers, because ultimately we're in the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. It's to be, again, wary of using AI, to know it can provide benefits, but know there are some issues that remain. Chief of all is the biases that are found in AI models, because algorithms are trained on historical data that contains biases. And so it's a classic garbage in, garbage out model. It's not to say whatever outputs that we get from algorithms aren't useful, but we need to be concerned that there could be bias. And so, for example, in a smart city context, a high-risk application of AI would be using facial recognition for border control or just for surveillance in public areas. And then we need to ask, is there a risk, for example, of bias profiling in this case? And what are the steps we can do to mitigate that? Even when tech works perfectly, which it currently is not, but even if that is the case, there is also the problem of accountability, explainability, and, as I mentioned, factuality. Large language models, for example, like ChatGPT-4, they are largely black boxes that generate outputs based on prompts that you give it, but it lacks ways of justifying why it has come up with that conclusion. So from the perspective of policymakers, if you're relying on certain information provided by AI, well, it's important to recognize accountability and responsibility today rest on human actors. And so that is what is useful in framing the use of AI in public service and the delivery of public services. So the onus rests on human actors to make sure we're using this in a responsible way. And so just to wrap up, a point that I mentioned right at the very start is knowing how to use technology, absolutely, in a technical sense, but also knowing its limitations and then formulating policy interventions that can meet the gap so that we're safeguarding the interest of our citizens from potential threats and risks.
Thanks, Willow. My last question to Liana is, you've talked about how smart cities should be people-centric and inclusive. As such, what is the way forward? A similar question that I posed for Willow. What is the way forward for local or city governments to reconcile the technological and the urban development with the need of making cities more humane and accessible? Because it's a challenge we've been facing for decades now, and this is a new dimension that we need to look at. What's your thoughts?
I know that balancing technological advancements, bringing forward smart cities is very hard to balance with making it more inclusive and equitable to all. It's a tall order. So I think from the point of view of the government, from the private sector, from the public sector, I think we should start small. So I have listed three key strategies which employs winnable a whole of society approach. So number one would be adopting a people-centric and inclusive approach. So I think it's time now for us to adopt a bottom-up planning in smart cities. So I think the first step of designing smart cities was actually going to the communities and assessing their actual needs. Second is it's very crucial to have stakeholder engagement at every level of smart city design and implementation. And yeah, I like Willow's point, that we have to bring communities together, bridging the digital divide is not just an individual effort. So we have to actually bring in the families. For instance, my dad, when we were here in Singapore, like he had a hard time navigating Singapore because he refuses to use his Google Map and City Mapper. So yeah, that's a manifestation of apprehension on using smart city technologies. So it's my duty as his daughter to actually help him, to guide him to use smart city technologies. Thus, it's not only an individual effort, but it's all our effort to help those who are left behind. Second is developing and implementing strategic plans. So in the Philippines, we had problems of like piecemeal, fragmented smart city initiatives, which don't actually are not integrated with each other. So in that sense, it's not really smart. So it's I think the government's duty is to implement or design with the input from the public cohesive roadmaps toward smart city development and initiatives. And as Aditya mentioned, yeah, it's indeed a challenge in developing countries, like you've mentioned about budgetary constraints. Yeah, we also have that in the Philippines and elsewhere in the world, in the emerging economies in the world. So yeah, we need to invest in digital infrastructure. And I like your point. So yeah, like blended financing on ICT, I would definitely bring it up to my boss in my ministry. That's a good idea. We could explore that. And lastly, in terms of what I said of starting small wins is, I think we should have pilot cities first, pilot smart city initiatives before building full-scale smart city initiatives. But as Willow pointed out, like in Singapore, it's very small. So maybe perhaps like lessons learned from Singapore could not be applied in the Philippines. So in order to like bridge the unknowns, like in order to have like viable smart cities, I think we should have like pilot smart city initiatives. And then there we could study, experiment, test if whether the smart city initiative does indeed produce the intended outcomes, and if they really meet the needs of the people. Third would be ensuring effective implementation and innovation. Like I've mentioned, like, yeah, we do have plans, but at the end of the day, it's mostly we need to also focus on implementation. Like, so implementation wise, there should be human-centric design. Technology must be accessible and user-friendly for all, considering barriers like language. And yesterday, I had the quick chat with my fellow civil servants from the Philippines, and we talk about our experiences on like bringing innovation in our respective agencies. And one of my fellow civil servant talk about his experience on like bringing forward this proposal of simple innovation. Like in his office, he talk about having like simple printers, because back then it was just manual typing, computing of documents. So I think all stakeholders should give support to local champions. Like we have local champions both at the national level and at the community level. And yeah, maybe my grand call to action would be we should embrace human-centric design, social inclusion, learn from success stories, and we should always ensure that no one is left behind in terms of smart cities.
Thanks, Liana. I have an anecdote about the thing that you shared, but maybe at the end of the round, I'll keep it for Aditya. I think we can all agree that bridging the digital divide in smart cities entail closing the infrastructure gap. And I'm sure you're familiar with the best practices in the developing countries with regard to financing and implementation of their digital infrastructure projects and services. What are some of these that the local governments in other developing countries can adopt? And you've mentioned VCF and other PPP initiatives. Please enlighten us more.
Okay, yes, Gaurav, thank you. Like the already mentioned from Gaurav, as a PP specialist, I will recommend PPPs as the maybe we can adopt as but we can adopt by the developing countries, because in developed countries, public-private partnership have been one of the most successful ways to fund and implement digital infrastructure, because the main consideration is the limited budget on every country, right? And local government in developing countries can adopt these strategies by establishing a clear regulatory framework first, to ensure regulation and policies that support partnership with the private sector, including risk sharing mechanism, fair profit sharing, and the guarantees of the legal stability. And to adopt public-private partnership, we can use the innovative financing schemes by utilize innovative funding source, such as a smart cities bonds, green bonds, or an infrastructure loans, to increase the attractiveness of the private investment in its digital projects. And we can adopt revenue sharing based models to attract technology companies to invest in digital infrastructure, while providing long-term benefits to local governments. But I want to highlight about how local government implementing this PPP for the first time, because based in my experience, I think because the PPP is a complex scheme, so it can be challenging. So most of local governments still lack knowledge about it. And before starting this project, there are some additional phases that need to be completed. It is important to remember for all of you that the first step in PPP is conducting feasibility studies. But however, many local governments struggle with this initial step. So therefore, it's crucial for the federal government, central government, to provide assistance. So in my experience, it can take almost 2 years to prepare these feasibility studies until finish with a final business case that can be presented to the potential investors. So I suggest that if local governments want to use this PPP scheme, they should start with the small scale project as a learning experience, such as public street lighting or waste management or water treatment systems. So if the small scale project becomes successful, it will be easier for the local government to initiate a larger project. And there is another one that developing countries can adopt is decentralization of decision making, because developed countries often give more autonomy to local governments in managing digital infrastructure projects. So this autonomy allows for faster decision making that suits local needs. And in developing countries, the adoption of this decentralization principle can help accelerate the implementation of digital infrastructure projects at the local level. So how we can do to the decentralization is to strengthening local government capacity. So we can train the local official in project management, creative financing, or digital technology to improve their ability to manage complex infrastructure projects. And we can collaborate with the university or local research centers. So we can leverage local knowledge and innovation from the university or the research institution to help design solutions that are relevant to the local that they need. And lastly, I would like to recommend about to adopt sustainable financing through smart city bonds that I already mentioned in PPP. So basically, in PPP, we are not use a PPP scheme as pure, but we blended all the instruments, all the fiscal incentive in there. So we all in implementing PPP, like I already said before, we use viability gap fund to leverage to elevate the attractiveness to the private sector. Because the PPP we will implementing in the local or rural area, which is not attractive at all and have a lower attractiveness. So I think we can learn from the developed countries that already use the smart city bonds also to fund to fund about the long-term digital infrastructure projects. So local government in developing countries can adopt by issuing bonds that focus on digital projects such as construction of high-speed internet networks or smart grids or smart water management system. Actually in Indonesia we already issuing the it called sukuk, project-based sukuk. Actually, the sukuk is a Sharia bond that issue just to as the source fund to build a project. So basically, we can create a thematic bond. What kind of this infrastructure that we can make, we want to make, and issuing this bond to provide the infrastructure. So this allows cities to fund infrastructure project without having to rely entirely on the state budget. And the other one, we can get support from the international financial institutions, such as like a World Bank or Asian Development Bank, can be important partners in providing guarantees or co-funding for smart city bonds. And I also want to highlight about we need to mapping local needs and the solutions. Local government in developing countries can learn from the experience of developed countries in accurately mapping local digital infrastructure needs. Some practices that can be implemented including using Internet of Things technology of infrastructure needs monitoring. We can adopting the Internet of Things to monitor and manage infrastructure such as traffic, energy usage, or water system that already implemented in developed countries. So which can more precisely identify its infrastructure efficiency and needs. And we can customize solution based on the local needs. So not all the cities or regions need the same digital infrastructure solution. Local government should analyze their specific needs and design the right solutions. And I want to wrap up all the, sorry. Okay, maybe I will try. Thank you.
Thanks. And last question I have for this panel is to Kritika. In terms of policy making and governance for smart cities, what are the lessons that can be extrapolated to the developing world from the case of Singapore? And I would like to bring the earlier point that I was trying to make. So earlier this morning, I had a talk with Prof. Tony Wong, and he was talking about a cookie cutter approach that most developing countries follow. That, let's see Singapore, what they're doing for water, for sustainability, for digital twin and whatnot. And the primary response from the bureaucrats is, that's Singapore, it's a different scale, we can never do that. So he was raising a point of using a principle-based adoptions rather than a cookie cutter approach. So what are your experience in that manner? And perhaps you could also share some success stories from other countries that you would have come across in this aspect.
I think we have discussed a lot on the various challenges of smart cities and all throughout the panel for the last hour or so. But let's be very clear. Working? Yeah. Okay. So let's be very clear. We are all still very pro smart cities. I think smart cities are here to stay. Technology is here to stay. And if cities are to remain competitive, there is no two ways about it. Governments have to learn how to manage this new form of urban development model well. In the case of Singapore, yes, Singapore is a unique case in some ways, and I face this question as a researcher all the time, especially when I study on Singapore context. Academic journals, other professors, other reviewers keep telling me, how can you generalize this? And that's true. We have to extrapolate it back to principles rather than the exact intervention. So Singapore, for example, doesn't have a single level, has a single level governance structure. It has a city-state geography. More importantly, it has a very high level of trust in technology and in the government. So these are the factors which we must filter the lessons we take away from Singapore for. So in the Smart Nation program, one of the key characteristics I observe from the analysis is, there is a very wide variation of policy tools being implemented. It's not just one or two, but you have training programs, you have workshops, you have information dissemination sessions, you have scholarships, you have regulatory sandboxes, pilot testing, you name it, it's there. in varying sectors, in various programs. If you look up the Smart Nation website, it's a lot to go through. There's an advantage to that, which I'll discuss in a bit. But at the same time, these policies are not occurring in silos. They are interacting with other policies. So if you are implementing Trace Together or a one service app, or let's say a smart water meter in a HDB pilot program, you also at the same time have training programs happening at the community center, which are letting the people know what to do. You are at the same time improving curricula in schools. The school curricula, I think, is being, several programs are now being introduced by MAS, if I'm not mistaken, on fintech programs. So there is a lot of interaction which happens between these various policy instruments, and these are done together. And when you have this one-side large variation of public policies and interaction between them, what we have is a level of flexibility that the government can afford. It can adjust and calibrate the Smart Nation program as and how the population needs it and what purpose it serves. So if there is an issue with, okay, there are certain sections of the population which are unable to access this, okay, fine, we are going to twist and calibrate, and we are trying to modify the policy program in certain ways. So yes, it is a top-down approach. There is some element of public participation and feedback mechanisms as well, but it is allowing for a very calibrated approach, or I would like to say an adaptable approach, which sort of rolls with the uncertainties associated with technologies themselves. There are other cases which we can learn lessons from. So for example, Helsinki, very different context, very different setup, but in that particular smart city, it takes a very bottom-up approach. So you have got basically citizens pitching in ideas and collaborating at a very local level, and that is their key motto for their smart city development. In Amsterdam, for example, similarly, several policy measures, but the motivation there is to have an interactive platform where companies, local citizens, and sort of what we call makers in Amsterdam can interact. So there, the city of Amsterdam is actually acting like a facilitator. It is the funder, it is the project partner, and then at the end, it's sort of becoming the project user of it all. So there are different approaches, but I think the principles of having a lot of variety, not just having one or two initiatives, but sort of having a lot of variety and understanding how all of these interact, is one of my key takeaway for smart city development, or the future for smart city development. Thanks, Gaurav.
Thanks so much, Kritika. This concludes our 3 rounds of questions. Now we open the floor for discussions and questions to our panelists, and I see one hand, but before that, please introduce yourself and speak into the microphone so that everyone can benefit. Thank you. Please.
Hi, thanks for the session. I'm Yich. I am a technologist. So I actually have some questions here. Overall, for smart cities, you require a black mirror device as the passport to enter. And there are legacy issues for both hardware and software. This presents cost as a barrier of entry, especially for those who may not have a job, the unfortunate folks who may be of a different social class. And we're beholden to these technology companies to make sure that they upgrade. So let's just take Netflix, for instance. They no longer support iOS 16 and below. So overall, as a technologist, what I'm very curious about is there any way to either regulate and force companies to do things? Or is it also the case whereby there's also tyranny of the minority, whereby they just stubbornly refuse and taxpayers bear the cost? So what would be the balance? Thanks.
Question, if that's okay. So I have one of my arms of the research works trying to understand what governments can do with technology companies and what technology companies can play in inclusive smart cities. Now, it's very easy to say, let's regulate the technology companies. It doesn't work like that, very unfortunately, or fortunately. It can stifle, if we have very strict regulations, it will stifle innovation. We still need technology companies to do their most cutting edge work, and we need, as governments, to facilitate that work, enable that work, however, in a safe environment. So regulating for, I would say, regulating for crucial urban services is very needed. So if there are urban services which are required for day-to-day life, yes, they must be regulated so in such a way that the majority of the population can access it easily. If they are not able to access it, that's the role of the government to figure out why they are not. Is it a lack of infrastructure? Is it a lack of knowledge? Or is it a lack of resources? And that's where the capacity of the government comes into picture. How are they able to tackle it in this case? A strict ban on let's not upgrade tech services will not work. Upgrading tech services every 3 months will also not work. So there is a balance to be struck there. At the same time, I do feel services apart from essential urban services, it becomes very difficult for governments to regulate. If you mentioned applications which are optional for day-to-day life or which are commercial, they are not the realm of the government in any form, that's something I feel is outside the scope of governance for smart cities. But for essential urban services, I do believe there is a balance to be struck, and strict regulation is not the way to go.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Nick. I'm on sustainability and carbon. I just wanted a bit your idea on your comment. My feeling is that we can have pretty smart cities without digital. There is a lot of technologies that our ancestors developed that we somehow have forgotten, and maybe we should go back to them. I have the sinister suspicion that we don't use them because the whole development industry, from consultants to, they're not gonna make money from it. Let's be a little honest. And what I mean is that when we talk, especially in the developing country context, when we talk about digital and data centers, first, these data centers is not only their cost, is also now their environmental cost. They have tremendous and very highly rising carbon impact. We have seen the moratorium even here in Singapore for developing data centers. And we don't have solutions at this moment. Already data centers, they have 2% of global emissions, which is a very sizable piece. So when we have so many other priorities, I just feel that this is a good to have in a very difficult time. I mean, we have 20, 30 years to mitigate for climate change. So I would like you to comment on non-technological smart cities policies. Thank you.
Is that directed to anyone in particular? The question? Okay. Do any of the panelists want to take on?
Question. So as a researcher on smart cities, there is always that question, do we really need technology to be smart? My thesis falls apart if that question is asked very strictly. But I do feel that technology is here to stay. I reiterate that point because in the end, cities are competing with each other. That competition will incite advancements in some manner or the other. And I don't think the incentive to stop using technologies is strong enough that a certain group of cities stop doing it. Yes, in developing countries, the priority should be on developing social infrastructure, physical infrastructure, basic physical infrastructure. And technology can be a way of fulfilling it, but it should not come at the cost of it all. So that's where I stand. I think it's very easy for us to say, let's not use technologies. Maybe we were better off, but it's very difficult to go back in time to figure out. And I think that ship has sailed that we can roll back on the technological advancements. That's my personal opinion, at least. I think Aditya is the better person to answer this.
Yeah, that's a heavy question because actually I don't have a background about tech, and so based on my experience, to provide to build smart cities in some like a remote or rural areas, the things about the kind of things about the technology is not it's not the I mean that's not become become the important things to make to realize a city or become a smart. Basically, in some remote or rural areas, just need the basic infrastructure for the first time. But in the case of the government in Indonesia, We provide the basic infrastructure like the fiber optics across the Indonesia, and then there is a challenges that we face like electricity. So we need to manage we need to manage the problem this first, and then we can continue to make develop the other things. So and I want to elaborate with the case in Indonesia. There is a movement in Indonesia called 100 smart cities movement. 100 smart city movement is not only in the capital city in each province. It's in this movement includes the small cities and the middle class cities. The cities will become the hub for the remote and rural area. So basically, we not provide the technological things in the villages or the remote area. We just make a hub, a technological hub. That the citizen or the community in the rural areas don't to go to the big cities to get the public services. We can just go. They can just go to the hub, small cities, or the small city, or the middle city. But recently, the other cities that initiate these movements, not always always building the technological infrastructure. We can use open source that we can use free, such as like we can use free Viware. Do you know Viware? Viware is like a organization that provides assistance to us to build smart cities. You can check on the Google. There is another some example of the cities that use that. So we can get the free we can get the knowledge about how to build smart cities by free. So it doesn't need to build the technological infrastructure in some areas.
Maybe just to kind of encapsulate what I learned from Critica, first of all, that's a very important question to ask. It's the messy reality that smart city is a good idea, but there are competing incentives to pursue it. And what Critica has said, first of all, is when it comes to digital technology, the ship has kind of sailed. And secondly, what I learned from Aditya is that through Smart City as a project, there are some very basic and important critical infrastructure that people can benefit from. But maybe what I can add in this conversation is that the use of technology may not be incompatible with climate goals. So technology, in a way, is a double-edged sword in that it has, for example, AI models are very carbon intensive. It has a lot of energy consumption that is highly problematic. But in the case of Singapore, if we jump outside of AI and data and whatnot, there are still technological solutions that, for example, help Singapore as a small island respond to, for example, the island heat effect, cooling techniques, as well as ways of approaching urban planning that makes it deal with rainwater a lot better as a sponge city. And so technology is not a monolithic structure. It has many different ways of offering benefits, but also drawbacks, and it's about using them well and being very aware of the profit incentive that you mentioned.
Thank Dipali, yeah.
So I just want to add before I ask my question to the current conversation. I think primarily in this panel we have talked about high tech, but when we're talking about smart cities, it's not just that kind of technology. It's dependent on the needs of the city. To give you an example, I was living in a hilly city in India for a while. So, and they are one of the smart city projects back home. One of the ideas that they took forward was building footpaths across the city, because from a people-centric perspective, or from a perspective that access to people, footpaths were very necessary. Another was making sure, because it's a two-lane road, it's a hilly city, mountainous city, so making sure during peak traffic times there's traffic policemen at the highway, where there's another road coming from the top of the hill, another coming from the bottom of the hill, so that people, like, flow of traffic is easier. In the more developed cities, that would be done through cameras and making sure you identify those spots. But currently, because of funding constraints or other reasons, it's being done manually. But that is a smart solution that cities have picked up. So it also depends on how you define smart and smart cities and what tech we are talking about. My question is a little bit different from the conversation we've had so far, and related to the earlier discussion the panel had. When we are talking about sustainable development, whether it's in smart cities or any other area, there's a lot of talk around cross-sectoral, cross-department planning and implementation. So in your experience, or in the studies you have done, research you have done, have you come across any cities, especially in the developing countries, where that's how cities have taken up the initiatives of smart cities, because there are different stakeholders that need to be involved? And the second part is, one of the important stakeholders that has been highlighted by the panel is private sector. But when it comes to private sector, especially where countries have limited funding, I'm specifically talking in the context of developing countries, when there's limited funding and also limited tech companies that you can go to for certain solutions, those companies are the ones setting the standards for the technology that you're going to implement. And there is a risk in terms of which company you use, and you are stuck with those standards quickly for 20 years. So are there any cities that you've come across who actually deliberately look at this perspective? And what do you think this perspective adds on to the whole urban city planning?
Or the panelists take up the question, I'm going to ask you to be brief because we've overshot with the time. So please, 3 minutes to respond. Yeah.
So in terms of the cross-agency, multi-sectoral like cooperation, it's very hard, at least from what I experienced working with the Philippine government. So that's also actually a barrier. So like other agencies have their own goals, have their own plans, have their own views on how a smart city should look like. So there's also a delay. So that's why we need cohesive, unified vision on how we have on how we design smart cities. And in terms of like, if we have examples of smart city initiatives, I think in the Philippines, mostly smart city initiatives are usually initiated by local government units. For example, in the city of Manila, and the capital of the Philippines, they already are one of the most more advanced countries, more advanced cities in terms of smart city initiatives. So they've rolled out smart payments for digital payments for cash payouts. Yeah, so we don't have rich experiences in terms of smart city in the Philippines. So maybe my fellow panelists could jump in on your experience with your countries.
Oh yeah. Basically, when in my experience, when we use PPP as the scheme, we collaborate with some other parties. Basically, if I tell more about the details, it costs the time. So yes, there's a separate. We use this as the this opportunity to make I think it's one SOP. We collect all the SOPs every different parties that maybe can become overlapping. So we can the SOP that name calls SOP link. So all the SOP that will be related and connected. We combine the SOP become the one. And for the PPP, we make one office that all the parties will be, can contribute it, like from the national development authorities, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Works, or the SMEs that will give the guarantees in the project. We make a single window office, so the PPP we can will deliver better.
Thank you very much. I'll just like to briefly add on to your question, because I'm the moderator, so I can take advantage. So India has few examples of certain cities where they have implemented unsiloed approach to developing smart cities. It's not so much a digital twin of a city, but they call it the smart city monitoring centers, where you can monitor solid waste management, so tracking of the waste collection vehicles, and where the disposal is happening, how much GHG gases are emitted, and so on. Traffic monitoring is happening through there, and water systems monitoring is happening. Places where electricity is provided or not provided, if there's any breakdown of electricity in the network, all of that through one system. So there are those examples in India. Maybe we can deal with it offline because we've overshot quite a lot. So thank you very much for this insightful discussion, panelists. Today, our panelists have emphasized how it is important to ensure that technologies and cities are inclusive. And I believe all of us here are in agreement that building smart cities is not just about digitalization or innovation, it's also about equity, access, capacity, and empowerment. Goals that all of us should strive to promote in our cities and home countries. Thank you again to our panelists and participants for sharing your perspectives. Thank you. And let's all continue working towards a smarter, more inclusive world. I would also like to thank the school and the organizers for giving us the opportunity, the student group, for such a platform. And we have Claudia representing them. Thanks again for supporting throughout these months, Claudia. And much more, we have Prof. Terence, who actually initiated this. Thank you very much, Prof. And guiding through this process. Thanks again, everyone. We call it a day, and I'll request the speakers to stay back for a photograph.